Now, just thinking about how the hypothalamus actually functions, one of the things the hypothalamus does is it regulates behaviour. So it regulates various sorts of behaviours, reproductive behaviour, feeding behaviour, and other behaviours like, for example, rage and fear. So it regulates behaviour, and we, as physiologists, we do not tend to concentrate on those things, but rather we concentrate on other things around homeostasis. But I just want you to remember that it does regulate behaviour, as well as secondarily, it regulates homeostasis. So the hypothalamus has a vegetative role in maintaining homeostasis, and some of the things that it maintains homeostasis include body temperature. So it's a temperature regulation centre of the body. It regulates metabolism, so it regulates feeding behaviour, it actually influences hunger and satiety, but it also regulates body mass and indeed metabolic rate. Other things that the hypothalamus regulates is water balance. In particular, it's involved in the regulation of blood volume, it's involved in thirst, or water intake, and also regulating urine output, which of course occurs in the kidneys. Other things that it regulates, the hypothalamus regulates, includes growth, and we'll talk a lot more about that in coming modules. Stress as well. So when you have a stressor response, the hypothalamus is key to the endocrine portion of stressor response, and also reproduction. So it regulates, for example, spermatogenesis, it regulates menstrual cycles, and in other words, fertility. So notice that some of these, it's a combination of both physiology, homeostasis, together with behaviours. One of the important things to note, I've already sort of mentioned that the hypothalamus integrates stimuli from both the internal and external environment. One of the things when you think about the hypothalamus as an integrator centre is that it receives inputs, many sorts of inputs, which are of two sorts of kinds. Firstly, there's neural input. So the hypothalamus receives a lot of neural input from other brain centres, from higher brain centres, from sort of the cortex, but also from example the amygdala, and so a lot of neurons synapse upon the hypothalamic neurons and affect endocrine output. The other thing that I want you to know is that the hypothalamus receives inputs which we call humoral. Now, this is probably an unusual term to most of you. Humoral means fluid-borne. So here what we're talking about is signals that come in particular via the blood and cross the blood-brain barrier and then are present in cerebral spinal fluid. Now, this humoral includes hormones, as hormonal inputs are important. For example, steroid-negative feedback is a classic example of a hormonal input into the hypothalamus. However, I use the term deliberately humoral because it's wider than just hormones. So things like metabolites, the level of blood glucose or the level of fatty acids, amino acids, also influences the hypothalamus. Think about the hypothalamus regulates appetite, for example. So the hypothalamus can respond to those metabolites. So when you think about inputs, think about both neural inputs and humoral inputs, which are much broader than just hormonal. What the hypothalamus does, of course, is integrate all those inputs and produces an appropriate output. Now, the outputs from the hypothalamus are also both neural and humoral. In the coming modules, we'll tend to concentrate more on the hormonal output from the hypothalamus, but realise that the hypothalamus has a lot of neural output. So it sends neurons from the hypothalamus go to, for example, the brainstem and then out towards the rest of the body from there. So both the inputs and the outputs are both neural and humoral. So just to summarise a bit about the hypothalamus, remember it's neural tissue. It's part of the brain. But it's also an endocrine gland. Now the hypothalamus has hormonal outputs, and it secretes neurohormones. And this is a term that we use for hormones that are produced or synthesized within neurons, so neurohormones. And in coming videos, we will examine the functional endocrine output from the hypothalamus, and that is really the pituitary gland. And remember, anatomically, the hypothalamus is connected to the pituitary gland, both the anterior and the posterior pituitary gland, by this stalk, the pituitary stalk. And so the endocrine output from the hypothalamus is really about the regulation of the pituitary gland, and we'll examine that in coming videos.